Hey, Office Hours listeners, it is your favorite host. That's right, Isaac. The good-looking one, the funny one, the smart one. One thing we run into a lot with listeners and people early in their career, especially in general, is feeling like you just don't really know what kind of job title, what kind of track makes sense professionally. And of course, you feel this fear of picking something that ends up sucking and feeling stuck in it forever. Well, there's two pieces of good news. The first is you're not going to get stuck forever. Whatever you take as your next career step, that first step, that next step, whatever it is, that's just the next best thing on the table right now that's going to help you learn more and move to something different. You're not going to get stuck forever. The other piece of good news is we have an awesome, free, fun tool over at crash.co to help you kind of figure out, based on your personality and interests, what might be a good first step. What are some of the role types that could be a good fit for your personality? It's really fun. It'll take about 5 minutes. It's called the Career Discovery Quiz. Crash.co/discover. Go over there, take it, see what kind of archetype you get. I am a closer, personally, and the role types that are recommended for me are sales, and I can't remember what the other one was. But it was cool, and it's a pretty fun thing. Go check it out. Crash.co/discover. All right. Now you got to put up with hearing TK talk.
Welcome to the Office Hours podcast. This is TK Coleman and Isaac Morehouse. We're like the Geek Squad for your professional development. Got a job you're trying to get, a work-related issue you're trying to resolve, a project you're trying to complete, an obstacle that's holding you up? Well, you're in the right place. You bring the problem, we bring the nuts and bolts. This is where you get philosophical insight and actionable advice on how to take charge of your life and career.
All right, here's one from Kind Knitter at kind_knits. How?
I don't know how you pronounce that. You said it like it was some sort of like insult. Like kind knits. It's like the most like sweet sounding handle ever. Okay, what's the question?
How do you make the best out of your fears? They have a purpose, yet they can drain us so much.
TK.
All right. So I would say first that, in life you are going to have problems, but you don't want to double your problems by having a problem with the fact that you have problems. What I mean by that is you're going to feel fear. You're going to feel a lot of emotions that you don't want to feel. And the last thing you need to do if you want to cope with that is to judge yourself as being some kind of failure, for what you feel. So-called negative emotions are not sins. They are not psychological failures. They're just part of the experience of being human. I think it's important to look at your feelings as kind of like the seasons. You're going to have sunny days. You're going to have rainy days. You're going to have days where it's really cold. You're going to have days where it's just really awesome, days where it's gloomy. And what do? You don't curse the day. You work with the day in the best way that you can, understanding that this is the part of the cycle of life. But I'll take it further than that. In addition to not judging yourself, I think it's absolutely important that you contextualize your emotional experiences by staying involved in the creative process. You have to have something that you're working towards or working on beyond that points you beyond what mood you are in the current moment. Otherwise, your mood is going to become your whole reality, and you won't have a larger, broader sense of purpose that kind of provides a framework for how you relate to that mood. What I often find is that people who are struggling with different things like fear or sadness or anxiety is that emotion, that one feeling, becomes the whole story. It reminds me of a C.S. Lewis quote where he said, a man who's counting to see how quickly he's falling asleep is likely to remain awake all night. If your primary task is sort of evaluating your emotional performance, judging it, trying to get over the emotion, treating dealing with fear as an end in itself, then you're never going to effectively deal with it. You have to have something beyond what you're feeling that contextualizes that emotional experience and not gives you the power to rise above it, but that gives you something that emotional energy can be channeled into. So find something to do that's meaningful to you. Find something that's worth doing in spite of your mood, and do it, and that'll carry you through.
I've found often that talking about it helps, because it helps you see how silly it is often, or how much smaller it is. A fear unnarratized is a fear legitimized.
Ooh. I like those rhymes.
I thought you'd
man.
appreciate that, because I could tell you were not tracking until I did that.
Yep.
And now you're like, oh.
I was like, what is this guy talking about? And then when you hit the two eyes, I was like, oh, this brother just realized.
So what I mean by a fear unnarratized is a fear legitimized. If you allow it to be a sort of a vague feeling of fear about something that's not fully defined and articulated, it feels very legitimate and very big. And it feels like you are very right to fear it, and you probably can't overcome it. If you talk to somebody and say, man, I gotta tell you, I'm just feeling like super afraid. Now that can be embarrassing to do. It can feel like, and it's more embarrassing because once you start to articulate it, that's when you realize that it's usually not as big as you thought. And someone will be like, well, what are you afraid of? What do you mean? Well, I'm just like, you start to say it. And as you hear yourself say it, you can sort of hear, oh, this isn't really that big of a deal. And it delegitimizes it in a way. And it helps you like realize it's much more tangible and bite-sized. It's not that the other person's going to necessarily tell you something amazing. It's the act of having to tell someone else with a straight face what you're really afraid of. I mean, I even get this with my kids sometimes, like when they're, scared at night, let's say, I can't sleep, I'm scared. Well, what are you scared of? It's like, well, I don't know, like that my bed will turn into a wolf. And sometimes they'll start giggling, and it almost like releases the tension, just the process of admitting your fear. I think that's okay. Everybody gets scared sometimes, whatever. And it becomes a smaller thing just by putting it into a narrative. So,
yeah, it also becomes an opportunity to relate to other people. There's something about finding out that your fear isn't as uncommon as you thought it was that makes it a little bit more manageable. I know for me, when I back in 2012, I had a hernia surgery. And I didn't know that I had a hernia. I had no context for it. I just knew that I was hurting. And one day I thought it was a stomach ache. And so then it would go away. And it did after a couple of days. So I thought it was fine. But then it came back a couple of times. And I didn't know what it was. But I knew I had pain. And I was like, oh, my gosh, I'm dying. Like this is probably what it feels like to die. I'm just scared. I don't know what's wrong with me. And the moment I opened my mouth and talked about it, everything from that point on just got easier at an exponential pace. Like there were lots of people who just knew that sounded familiar and was like, oh, it's probably one of these two things. This is what you should go do. You should go talk. And I talked to a doctor about it. Doctor knew right away this was a hernia. And then once I just owned it, I had a label for it. Oh, okay. So the name of this pain that I'm feeling is hernia. And now I know how to talk about it. And when I started talking about it, like every 5 guys I would talk to was like, oh yeah, I had one of those, or I had a cousin or a brother who had one of those. It's no big deal. Just go get a surgery. Me,
I was like, yeah, you'll probably die. No one will ever know what it is. Isn't there some like principle in like Harry Potter or magic or something, like to name a thing is to control it or something like that?
Yeah, so that's Ursula K. Le Guin. Yeah. It's called the Rule of Names. Yeah. And there's a moment where the kids are in the classroom and the magic teacher is talking about why should you never give anyone your true name? And the kids are guessing at it. And then the magician, Mr. Underhill, comes in and she says, Mr. Underhill, can you tell them why? And he says, because to know the name of something is to possess power over it.
And that can be something to be avoided that's dangerous, or something to be harnessed, So like, man, I just feel like I can never get anything. Oh, you have discombobulae. Totally normal. Don't worry about it. A lot of people have that,
Yeah.
It's funny though, because after you figured it out that you had a hernia and you felt better about it, then you were like preaching the gospel of hernias, and every time I told you I felt sick, you were like, it's probably a hernia. I know you have a hernia. Let me help you. I'm like, no, it's not a hernia. You were just like applying that everywhere.
Right. I turned hernia into a mental model for that period of my life. But yeah, man, going back to that magic thing, you see this in fiction a lot, in fantasy movies a lot, where naming the demon is a necessary component of exorcising the demon. That there's something about saying this is the proper label for what I'm dealing with that makes it possible to cast it out. And I think the same is with fear. Like when you narratize it, you are engaging in that process of naming the powers that are dominating your life.
Now that can be dangerous too. So I find this a lot with like, say, what would be called mental illnesses, for example. That if somebody's like, yeah, they just can't focus that well or whatever, and the minute it gets named, oh, you have ADHD, or you have, it can be a dangerous, disempowering thing that makes you slip into a bit of a victim mindset. That's like, oh, well, I'm always going to suffer because I have something with a name. You know what I mean? Like it's real, it's legitimate. I'm suffering, instead of like, I'm just struggling. Like everybody struggles in various ways. Maybe I'm struggling to focus. Oh no, it's not just that. It's because I have a condition. Like that can actually be dangerous as well, don't you think?
Yeah. Could we put it this way? Could we say, name the fear, but don't name yourself according to the fear? Because the people who say things like, oh, I am an X or a Y or a Z, it's not because they're naming a problem, but they are naming themselves. They are saying, my identity is derived from the existence of this problem, you know?
Yeah, that's an important distinction.
All right, here is one from RBORTINS Twitter.
R. Bortons?
Yeah, is that how you say it? At R. Bortons?
R. Bortons, yeah.
R. Bortons?
I think it's Robert Bortons.
Robert.
What up, Robert?
I don't know Robert. Who's Robert?
I think maybe, I don't know if me and Cameron met with him one time. He's a great guy. Classical Conversations.
Okay.
They're like a homeschool sort of nationwide network of sort of curricula and things like that. Really cool place.
What's happening, Robert? Robert wants to know, what is the
What's
difference?
happening, Robert? I'm TK. Sorry we haven't met yet. It's like so awkward. I'm like, oh, I know him. You're like, I don't.
Why is not knowing someone such an insult, by the way?
Isn't that funny?
People use it that way.
know,
Who is this guy? I never heard of this guy. Why is that an insult? With so many people on this planet, the odds are high that for any random person in the
Are
field,
you trying to
haven't heard
defend
of.
yourself for not knowing Robert? Okay, go ahead. Let's hear the question.
What is the difference between education and schooling? Can you lead a horse to school and force them to learn? If you're in government schooling and have too many misses, they can send you to juvie. What does that do for society?
It's a lot of questions wrapped into one.
Yeah. Are we still in the first half?
What's the difference between school and where you answer first?
Yeah. Yeah.
I don't know. You have the questions.
Yeah, in terms of the number of questions, we're still in the first half.
Then go for it.
All
What's
right.
the difference between schooling and learning?
All right. So usually when I criticize schooling in the way that John Taylor Gatto would criticize it, I mean compulsory schooling. That's the full term for me. And so based on that, the difference between education and schooling is that one thrives on coercion and the other thrives on creativity.
You had to use. You could have said on like voluntary choice, but it had to have a C. It had to start with a C, right?
Yeah, voluntary choice is the act of creating, right? It's
Sure.
When you make a voluntary choice, you are creating a result.
Yeah, okay.
It's
fine. But I know it's a post hoc justification though. You just needed the alliterative. Okay, go ahead. Compulsion versus creativity.
All right, so yeah, I mean, education is about what you want to learn in order to realize goals or solve problems that matter to you. It's where as an individual you take ownership of the process. Even if you have teachers, even if you have people helping you out, you are owning the process. Whereas schooling, someone else owns the process and you're forced to do it with threats. Kind of like in the example you gave for your question where you get sent to juvie if you miss a certain number of classes. That's schooling. That's the difference for me. If you want to adopt the concept of schooling that's non-compulsory and say, well, you know, a formal institution of learning or something along those lines, then I think then education is the broader category into which schooling fits. That education is the process of seeking out experiences and insights that empower you to create the results that matter to you. And schooling is one manifestation of that, namely being in an organized environment that's set up to help you master certain kinds of skills or explore certain kinds of ideas. That's how I define the difference. Before we move, how would you?
No, I think that's right. And I think the schooled approach or schooling or schooled mindset it answers too many of the questions for the learner. So, education is like, you have to come with the question, why do I want to learn something? And then, well, in order to achieve that why, what do I want to learn? And maybe you get some of that partial what answer from somebody that you go ask. And then how am I going to learn it? That's kind of where the process of education comes in, is like, okay, I know why I want to learn to do this thing because there's some outcome that I value. And then what do I need to learn to get that outcome? I might start asking around, and I kind of identify that with a little help. And then I say, okay, I know I want to learn this. I know what it is that I want to learn to accomplish it. Mm-hmm. How am I going to do it? Well, that's where I'm going to go to a course or a book or a friend or a process and get educated on it. Whereas schooling, it answers all those on your behalf. Why am I learning this? Because I said it's good for you to learn this to be a normal person. Just shut up and learn it. Yeah. Well, what are we actually learning? The subjects that I deem, the royal we, the state, that we dictate out of all of human experience and knowledge, these subjects must be learned. Just shut up and learn them. How am I learning it? By taking the things that I tell you about doing. And all those are answered for you. And so it's just a process of basically what you are learning in school. Forget the subject matter. What you're really learning is obedience to authority. That's the main takeaway. That's the main thing that you are transforming into, is a more obedient, subservient person. And those who don't become that way are people who the school system didn't work on. It tried, but it didn't work. And luckily, it doesn't work on very many people. Luckily, it doesn't work on enough people anyway. It does work on some, but it tries to make you first and foremost obedient to experts and authority. That's the real difference.
I want to say something about the subservience or obedience to authority. I think a lot of people have a comic bookish notion of what that looks like. People, when you say something like subservience, it kind of, paints the picture of some person that's like, yes, my lord. The guy that's always afraid of getting killed, because the villain tells him, go do something. Oh, you bet. Yes, sir, my lord, I will. But being subservient can also show up in forms that look empowering and in control, but that still lack agency. So for instance, maybe it's you only being great when other people tell you precisely what to do. You only being capable of learning new things when other people are the ones telling you where to learn it from. Or, that is probably a more common form of subservience, because most people don't walk around just like, oh, yes, sir. Yes, sir. Most people are very successful in certain ways, but if you take away the instructions and demand that they create their own structure, then they fall apart.
Being incapable of finding fulfillment and meaning if you don't have some external scoreboard that compares you and ranks you against everybody else your age, or just stuff like that. I mean, it's amazing how many people, especially the high achieving type of students, will panic if they're in an environment where it's like, how do I make the teacher like me and give me a higher grade? Like that status seeking. That is a form of mental subservience. You are subversing your own agency and letting it become secondary to winning the game that someone else puts before you as important, and making sure that they give you a star of approval. That's a very, very dangerous thing.
Yeah, absolutely. This is why I take issue with that phrase, get an education, because if you really understand what education is, it's not something over there that you gotta go get. What people really mean is, get involved in a school. But education is something that's always happening, and either you are paying attention or not. If you suffer the death of a loved one, that's an opportunity for education. If you go after a dream and you fall on your face, that too is an education. If you are watching a TV show and you are paying attention, you are noticing, or if you go see a play, that is an education. If you turn on the radio and you listen to a song, that's an education. You are always in the midst of an opportunity to understand reality at a higher and deeper level.
So at the risk of playing word games, I don't want to get too but I have found this way of using the words useful. So I described what I consider schooling. Mm-hmm. And that's not all compulsory is the main thrust, but it's not always that way. Even some schools that are non-compulsory, I would say they still have that mindset and approach.
Yeah, for sure.
And then learning is something that happens all the time, whether you want it to or not. You're always learning, for better or for ill. You're learning throughout your life. And I see education as the choice to make learning something that you are conscious of and deliberately participating in and framing in some way. So like, if a loved one dies, you're going to learn something. Yeah. Something about your body of knowledge or experience is going to change whether you want it to or not. Yeah. If you tell yourself, I am going to turn this into an education, there's some kind of deliberateness or agency around the learning that can enhance it, that can guide it, that can direct it, that can make it your friend and servant instead of something that you just hope turns out to be learnings that are valuable.
I like that way of putting it. I can buy that. I can buy that. Hey, man, I'll enroll. I try to use it.
You have enrolled me in your mindset. Isn't that something they use in like sales training dialogue? Like,
I have no idea.
Enroll the person in your point of view or something like that. I looked at Lolita like, hey, you read some sales books, right?
How would you request that? Would you say, allow me to solicit your enrollment on this idea?
I don't know. That sounded a little overly wordy.
Yeah.
I'm not sure.
All right. This is from Moritz Burling.
Let's go. Hey, you know what? I'm not even going to criticize you. I think you got it right.
Moritz, what small gesture stirred your soul when you observed or received it? What small gesture stirred your soul when you observed or received it? I got to think on that one. That's actually a really good one.
Yeah, that is a really good one. I think I can think of two real quick, top of my head. So one, I think I was maybe 12 or 13, and I was at like a youth group event or something. And I just had a guy who's the youth group leader or whatever. And it's a cool guy. And again, one of these guys that like, I would never use the word mentor at the time. I don't know if I would now. I don't really like that word for some reason. But he was a cool guy I looked up to and I learned stuff from, and like a friend, but not quite a peer, a little bit older. And I think I was just talking about something that I rarely talk about because I rarely feel it, but every once in a while I feel it. Just like the challenges of growing up without a dad in a normal sense. My dad was in a car accident when I was 3, and so he was at home, but he had constant care. He has no short-term memories, in a wheelchair. You know, we've always taken care of him more than the other way around. And somehow that came up, and he just looked me in the eye. He put his hand on my shoulder, and he said, and I don't even remember the context. He said, "You don't have to be Superman." And man, that just hit me. And I come back to that every once in a while. Because there's something that I still haven't fully processed and I don't fully understand. Maybe after you read your counseling book, you can tease it out of me briefly. That I think because of that experience, growing up very independent by necessity, and all of me and my siblings kind of having to take care of ourselves in some ways and do some things, that I sort of have this subconscious need to like always carry the weight, sort of, to always like, that's why when I first came across the book Atlas Shrugged, the title alone just appealed to me. Like sometimes I just feel like I want to shrug, and nobody's putting this on me, and I don't feel like a victim, but there's something I noticed that I do to myself where I feel like I have to be, I have way higher standards for myself than anybody else. I don't care if other people mess up, but I get really mad at myself if I do, and I feel it builds up sometimes. And so that little gesture, like he didn't need to say that. He had that thought, whatever, and he just said it, and it meant a lot to me. And then the other one was a guy that I used to work with, a colleague, when my wife and I told everybody at work that we were moving away from Michigan, we were going to move to D.C. and take this new opportunity. Everybody else is like, you know, the normal thing. Oh, I don't want you to leave. Oh, I'm a little sad, whatever. And he was like, great. And I was like, oh, I thought you like, you know, first I was loving, he was like, you guys are way too big for this town. You're way too big for this state. You're going to do amazing things. You're like movie stars. Go somewhere bigger. And I was like, that was like, for some reason that just really stuck with me. Like that little gesture of being like excited for me and telling me, here he is staying there, and he's basically telling me, you're going to do more stuff than I ever did. Go for it. Like, and that was just really, that stuck out with me. I always remember that. So there's a couple.
I love that, man. All right. So this is hard to come up with any, but I'll give you two.
Because nobody's ever done anything nice.
I mean, it must be nice to have the kind of lifestyle.
I'll give you two that are imaginary. I imagine if Isaac told me that he was appreciative of me.
I'll tell you the gestures I would like to have. Isaac Morehouse thanking me for some of my hard work. That would be nice. All right, so one, that comes from a guy named Alan. There was a guy named Alan who would work with my dad at the buildings. My father would, get a lot of fixer-uppers when I was younger. Me and my brothers would go over there, and we'd work with him. And I was never a guy anyone mistook for being cut out for construction, never at any point. And I still have not overcome this. And
Hammer? You mean MC Hammer?
right. Is there a book on this tool? I would love to understand its relationship.
You would underline and take notes in the instruction manuals of the tools.
Right. Because I wanted to understand what it means about us as a species that we use these tools. But I remember there were always, my brothers there and guys from the church there, and it was just a bunch of guys. And man, something like not knowing how to use a hammer was a big deal because you would get made fun of for like 10, 15 minutes. You couldn't do that kind of thing if you did that kind of thing. And so I would just be super tense because I knew that I couldn't afford to not know something or make a mistake on something. And one day I was in charge of doing some hammering and I botched it. And my father's friend Alan was right next to me, and I go, I'm so sorry, I'm so sorry. And Alan just goes, oh no, man, it's all good. We all make mistakes. That's how you learn, brother. Here, just do it like this. And it was it. That moment was over. And the small gesture there was his decision to just not be dramatic. He just wasn't dramatic at all about that failure, and that was huge. It introduced to me that idea that I too can be non-dramatic about my failure. I'll give you another one. This was in 5th grade. We were at a new school, Divine Infant. And
notice you always talking grades, and I was homeschooled, so I never knew what grade I was in. Yeah. I can only talk in ages. Yeah, I'm like 5th grade. I'm trying to do the math. How old were you? 5th grade.
That's the difference between education and school.
That's it right there, man.
I think of myself as being at a grade.
You're shackled to somebody else's timeline.
And you're measuring yourself by your goals, right? Like, hey, it's just all about progress for me, not my grade. But 5th grade, we used to go outside for recess, and we would all play football. And here's yet another thing that I was terrible at. And I was always the last guy to get picked because, I was Butterfingers. I would drop it every time, man. And so one day in gym class, Mr. Trumbull, that was the gym teacher.
That sounds like a teacher from a book.
Mr. Trumbull?
From like children's fiction. Yeah.
You know what? It
Mr.
should.
Trumbull.
I have been told that I should write a book and just tell that story. I've been told.
I would read it based on the name alone.
Yeah, I don't know if it'll be any good. But yeah, it does sound like a made up name. But Mr. Trumbull was the real gym teacher. And one day he took us all outside and he just decided he had us do this drill where, we take off running. He'd throw the football to you. You catch it and then you come running back. And he did it with all the different guys. And he was explaining the mechanics of passing and showing, throwing it to us. And so it was my time to come up, and you could hear the other kids being like, oh, this is going to be funny. And I run. Mr. Trumbull throws me the ball, and I catch it. And he was completely uninterested in that fact, got the ball back from me, threw it to the next guy. He was non-dramatic about my success. And there was something about that moment that changed the game for me. And the next time we went out on recess to play, this kid, Gary Richide, who was like the best quarterback, he picked me and he threw me the ball and I caught it. He threw it to me again, I caught it. By the end of that school year, I was the first guy that Gary Richide would pick on his team, and I was his go-to receiver. And I remember him asking me one time, man, ever since that day with Mr. Trumbull, you've just been a different guy. What was it? And I was just like, he never doubted that I could catch it.